So my co-author, Jamie Swift, and I have been working on the idea of basic income. We've been doing advocacy for basic income since 2013, when we were part of a new group, the Kingston Action Group for a Basic Income Guarantee. And we've been doing advocacy, since then. That's almost 8 years. And when I started, I think rather naively, I thought, oh, this makes so much sense. Surely we'll have a basic income like within a few years. And I'm actually one of the younger members of the group, so the rest of them looked at me as if I was quite naive, which I was. And when we've had, the group has had a lot of success in kind of doing education at the grassroots, but also with politicians. One of our group members actually met with Kathleen Wynn's senior staffer prior to the announcement of the basic income pilot. I think there was already receptivity there, but when the pilot was announced, it was announced first in the budget and then started to roll out in 2017. Jamie and I had spoken, we'd been at some events with some of the participants, and we thought it would be a great idea to amplify their voices because their stories are so powerful. And we were in the middle of doing the interviews when the pilot was canceled, which was a devastating blow, but also made the book seem even more important.
Yeah, so I mean, bringing it closer to home in Hamilton, what you talked directly with those participants. So, I mean, what was the impact before it got canceled? Let's just focus on the actual basic income. What was the impact on their lives?
I think the word that comes up a lot in terms of the impact of the basic income pilot on participants is transformative. It really transformed people's lives. It also gave them, the subtitle of the book, The Case for Basic Income, is Freedom and Security, Freedom, Security, Justice. But for the participants themselves, I think it gave them an income floor that gave them a sense of security, and then the freedom to make better choices about their lives. Having that stability, that stable income floor, enabled people to move into better housing, to go back to educational programs, change jobs, all kinds of things that those of us with money take for granted, like buying a new winter coat or putting food in your freezer or buying gifts for your kids or your grandkids. It gave them a dignity. It gave them dignity, and really was transformative.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned, I mean, of course, it's no one's business, how people spend their money. But when you talk about basic income, that does come up. It's the idea that, people are going to spend frivolously. And not only that, they're going to stop working and they're just going to live off the government. Just by the sounds of it, that wasn't the case at least in the participants you spoke to.
So that is one of the common objections to basic income, that if you give people, quote unquote, money for nothing, they'll sit on a sofa and play video games or while away their life. And maybe a few people would do that. I don't know. I think most people want to improve their lives, and having not just the money, but the security of the money and the stability of the money allows people to make plans. And when you're living on a low income or an insecure income, that really jeopardizes your ability to think into the future. And the basic income pilot in Ontario was no grand amount of money for a single person. It was about $17,000 a year. That's not a lot of money to try to live on, but it was, there was a stipend also for people who had been on disability. So it was in the range of about double what people would be getting on social assistance or the disability, ODSP, the disability pension. So one of the things that comes up in more philosophical discussions about basic income is our idea of work and what counts as work. And so often the people we spoke to had profound or long-term disabilities that prohibited them from getting a regular kind of full-time or even a part-time job, but they still contributed to their communities. They volunteered, they had lots of ways of giving back. And so basic income also allows us to think, I think, a little more clearly about what really is essential. And that's one of the things that COVID has highlighted, the kind of essential work that's often unpaid and invisible.
Yeah, another interesting, at least in, well, I know in the case in Hamilton, and also there have been other basic income projects. And in those projects, it seems to be almost consistent right down the line that not only did people not stop working, they were able to upgrade their skills and move on to maybe better employment and earning more money. And that's kind of the part of it that you may not really expect. But, like you said earlier, people are trying to improve their lives, and transformative, I guess, fits under that definition.
Yeah, I think that's been the case in basic income pilots around the world, whether it's a high income country or a low or medium income country. Over and over and over, we see that people take that money and they use it in ways that are good for them and good for their future, good for their children's future. One of the things that it still enrages me, it was the cancellation, and partly as a social scientist, that, I mean, it was terrible for the 4,000 people, but we were, by now we would have data. We'd have really good data to inform these conversations. There was a really strong research plan, evaluation plan of the pilot, and all of that went in the garbage can, which it just kills me to think about that. But there has been some research done, I mean, our book included, but also from McMaster University, Wayne Luchuk and his group have done some research on, it's not the same, it doesn't have the same quality or strength as the original evaluation program, but that's exactly what they found, was that people who had jobs, many of them were able to either upgrade their skills and or find better jobs, which, as you point out, is a bit unexpected. But it's having that kind of stability. Their research showed that the people who had gig employment, kind of multiple short-term precarious contracts, their health benefit even more from the basic income than the people who had been on social assistance.
Yeah, and we know, I mean, financial insecurity, there are offshoots to that. There's, your health isn't as strong as it could be. And I know while sometimes we can get into dangerous kind of stereotypes, the fact remains that people with food insecurities, with financial insecurities, crime rates can be higher. So in all, when we look at the big picture, and if someone out there is thinking, what does that do for me? I wouldn't even, get a basic income, because I mean, the way the program was set up, every dollar you earned, it would take 50 cents off your basic income. So I think if you got to like 34,000, just based on that pilot project, $34,000 would have meant your basic income is basically off the table. So a lot of people wouldn't qualify for it, and they're thinking, well, how do I benefit? And the reality is, it just, when you just talk about our resources, our health resources, our emergency services, this all takes a burden off of that. And even, again, we get to the bottom line and, taxpayer money in the long run, just the way that the models have looked, at least to this point through some of the pilot projects, in the long run, there's a good chance it could be saving taxpayer money.
Absolutely, absolutely. It could absolutely save taxpayer money. It would, over time, it would probably more than pay for itself. I mean, there are some estimates that for every dollar you invest in reducing poverty, you gain $2 in savings. So one of the things to remember is that we already pay a lot for poverty, as you mentioned, especially in healthcare. When we think about the crisis or the verge of a crisis that our healthcare system was on just in the last few months because of COVID, because everything is so stretched. If we could save 20% on our healthcare dollars, that would be a massive savings, or it could be reinvested into home care or pharmacare and all kinds of other programs. We know that for people who are living with food insecurity, that their healthcare costs increase dramatically. We have some very good data that are Ontario specific that show the cost of being poor and not having enough food to eat. If you're really severe in food insecure, it's almost healthcare costs are almost 3 times what they would be for someone who's food secure. So one of the problems is that those savings wouldn't happen in an electoral cycle. It's going to take at least probably 20 years, and I think probably a few generations to see the full effects of that kind of investment. But we could think of it as an investment. We talk a lot about the cost, we don't talk about the savings. And we also, the Basic Income Canada Network has put together a model. I mean, the specifics of how much it would cost and what it would look like would depend on the government and what they decided to do. But the Basic Income Canada Network has done a model that relies on progressive tax reform, so that we basically take the existing tax dollars and redistribute them, so the people in the bottom half of the income distribution would get more money, and the people at the lowest end would get the most, and then it would slowly taper off. And then people in the upper end, like me, would pay more, which, our tax system has gotten less and less progressive over time. But I think that would be an incredible investment in the future of this country.
Yeah, you mentioned election cycle, and that's maybe the biggest challenge because, well, we saw it. I mean, it happened. We had a change of government and we lost the pilot program. So, I mean, how do we get to a point where not only does it get implemented, which is a challenge in itself, but also it survives multiple government changes?
That's a great question, Anthony. And I think we like to think of basic income as the 21st century equivalent of Medicare. We Canadians, when Medicare was founded, when it was started in the 1960s, first it rolled out first in Saskatchewan, and then the rest of the country thought, oh, that's a great idea, let's do that too. But there was a lot of negative response. Doctors went on strike in Saskatchewan. The insurance companies weren't happy. Lots of people didn't think it was a great idea. And so it took a lot of courage. It took, we're still looking for our Tommy Douglas for champion for basic income, but we think it could be the same kind of foundational social program that gives Canadians pride in who they are.
Okay, so I mean, let's talk about the book, The Case for Basic Income, written by you, Elaine Power, also Jamie Swift, who was your co-author on this. Yeah, and what else can we find in the book? People in Hamilton will be curious to see it localized a bit, but also just where else do we kind of go here in terms of basic income, and how much do we cover?
So the book focuses on the Ontario Basic Income pilot and a few of the participants. So we feature some stories. It's Hamilton heavy, but we also have some stories from Lindsay. So we're kind of using. We hope it's accessible for most people to read. We're using the stories of people's actual lives to illustrate the ways that basic income is transformative. But along the way, we also talk about some of the history of basic income, some of the politics of basic income. We have some little behind the scenes stories about, for example, how Lindsay got to be chosen. So Hamilton was the first, had 1,000 people participate. Lindsay actually was what in the jargon is called a saturation site, where most people living in poverty in Lindsay could have been eligible to sign up for the pilot. So 2,000 people. I think if you think about the age range from 18 to 65, we estimated that was probably about 20% of the population of Lindsay. So it was also, they were also looking for effects, kind of broader effects in the community, not just for individuals and their families. So I think it's colorful. I hope it's interesting and engaging for people. So it connects with the people, but also the places, specifically Hamilton and Lindsay, and some of the key players as well.
All right, Elaine Power, co-author of The Case for Basic Income, available where books are sold.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Amazon, ebook, paper cover.
Your local independent bookstore.
All right, perfect. That's good to know. Elaine, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you for your interest.